What's going on, guys? Garrett here. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the most argued about, controversial topics that I've ever seen within the reloading community. And I know that's a big thing because we argue about everything. But the question is, does Headstamp matter? And I'm going to be taking a little bit more in depth. Does Headstamp affect accuracy, or MOA? Because I feel like there's some good videos out there. Bolt Action Reloading did a great one talking about case capacity and the differences between the case capacity and does it change between Headstamp and everything along those lines. Today I'm going to be focusing on, does Headstamp make a difference in accuracy? We know that there's some different weights in them. We know that there's some different case capacities between the different Headstamps, but do those minor differences actually make a difference on your bullet downrange? So I've chosen 10 different Headstamps that I want to go through. But the first one I have is Hornady, and then I have Starline, Norma, Wolf, PMC, Winchester, WCC, ZSR, and Federal, or FC. And those are only 8. So I have 9 and 10. I want to do 2 different variants of Lake City. So my first, I have Lake City 18 to 22 for the year range. And then the second round of Lake City, I have 23 to 24. So the reason that I wanted to do 2 different Lake Cities is there's also a bunch of controversy about, do the different years on the Headstamps make a difference? I know that 18 to 22 is kind of spread. That's a 4-year difference. And then I'm doing the 23 to 24, which is only a 2-year difference. But unfortunately, in order to get the amount of cases, because this is all range pickup brass or secondhand brass, I had to go with that 4-year spread, unfortunately. So with that being said, I have went through and completely prepped all of this brass, meaning I've full length sized it, I've de-primed the cases, I've trimmed to case length, and I have all of those measurements here, which I'll go ahead and pop up on the screen for you guys to look over real quickly. And with the averages, I don't think they're that important, but I more just wanted to show that I try to keep it consistent as possible. I think there's a few, Starline has a few that are a little bit lower than I would like to see. Like one of them is 1.744, which is quite a bit lower than the 1.748 to 1.53. I tried to stay within 5 thousandths. I really tried to stay between 1.750 and 1.753, but with the case trimmer I have, about all I can get is 5 thousandths. That's about all the variance, which you're going to have that variance in some of your different components anyways. So I don't think you're going to see any more variance than you normally would. But the point there was, I took my time and tried to get these as close as possible as far as the trim lengths. With that being said, this is still range brass. I still have a few in here that are, underneath the threshold that I wanted to see. But some of them, like, that's all the Starline brass I had. I didn't have anything longer. Plus, I went ahead and marked those pieces of brass. Let me see if I can find that. Yeah, so here's that piece of Starline. Let me see if I can show you guys a little bit better angle. So I went ahead and marked that at 1.744. So when I go to shoot that, I'm going to make sure to keep that, either shoot that first or last, because I want to see, does that slightly shorter trim length actually make a difference as far as accuracy? Am I going to see a flyer with this specific round, or is it going to blend right in with the rest of the group? That's one question I had. I actually did have one extra piece and I was going to remove that, but I wanted to see if that affects anything as far as a shorter case. Does it make a difference with your accuracy as well? And I'll go ahead and pop it up right here, and we're just going to go through it real quick. So I want to first mention Federal, so FC up there on the Headstamp. It had a standard deviation of 0.33, which is the lowest out of the group. This was pretty surprising because the length actually had the largest standard deviation. If you remember back, the length standard deviation was 6 thousandths, which was almost 4 thousandths over what the next biggest standard deviation was. So it was huge compared to all of the other ones. So to get standard deviation on the weight this low was pretty surprising. That basically tells me that there's not a big correlation between the trim length and between the weight. So the brass isn't actually, that small trim length brass is not what's making up the weight difference. But I went ahead and plugged it into an Excel formula for correlation, and it basically looks at a data set and compares the two to see if there's any sort of correlation between the two. And it came out as positive 0.26, and basically it's either -1 or 1 scale. So -1 meaning it has negative correlation. If one number goes up, the other one goes down, but they do correlate in that aspect. And +1 means if one number goes up, the other number also goes up. 0 means there's absolutely no correlation between the two numbers. So at 0.26, that means that they have almost no correlation between the length of the case and the weight of the case. So that weight is coming from something else. It's coming from basically the heart of the brass, not that small trim length that we're taking off the top. Hey guys, before I get into all of the range data, I just wanted to take a few minutes to kind of get into some of the variables that I didn't feel like I hit on or explained well enough. First is case overall length. So all of these were sized at 2.20 overall length. Second is these were all shot off of an AR or out of an AR style platform weapon, 16-inch barrel. These were shot off of bags at 50 yards. So I've doubled all of these. I have a neat little tool I use. Maybe I'll go over it in a video in the future that calculates the MOA of all of these groups. So I just kind of wanted to mention that real quick. 26.1 grains of StaBall Match, Hornady 55 grain full metal jackets, and then Federal primers. I think I mentioned all of that in the beginning, but I just wanted to make sure that I hit on the case overall length. So without further ado, let me grab this target and we'll kind of go over some of these real quick. So the first group here is Federal. These groups are a little bit bigger overall than I would have liked to see, but they're not the best components. StaBall doesn't shoot the very best out of my gun, but 26.1 grains seem to be pretty stable, no pun intended. But moving on to ZSR, you can see there's two kind of flyers here. The rest of it grouped pretty well. So if you exclude these two, this overall was a pretty good group. Lake City, 18 to 22. This was a terrible group. I mean, it almost looks like there's three groups. This one you can exclude as maybe a flyer. But even if you take one more, like it doesn't really help the group out much because of how spread that is. Here's Lake City 23 and 24, kind of the same way. Two groups. If you took and excluded three of these, then this is a pretty good group, but that's three whole shots. That's 3/10 of all of the shots were not great shots. Moving on to Winchester. This was the best group if you exclude the two, and it's actually the best group even if you don't exclude the two outside shots here. So it came in at the lowest, and we'll go through that data here in a minute. I just wanted to show you the target real quick. PMC, another good group, especially if you exclude three shots. It's a really tight group, but again, we're only excluding two to account for outliers. Moving on to Hornady. Hornady had a decent group. Excluding two wouldn't really do anything because the group doesn't really change. You can see there's not really any outliers, so it was just kind of an average group. Wolf, kind of the same way. If you exclude these two outliers down here, those two there, it's not a bad group overall. Starline, kind of in the same boat. Had two flyers, but if you exclude those, pretty good group. And then Norma here at the end was absolutely terrible. This was one of the worst groups we had. There's no amount of excluding you could do that would make this group better unless you only took the top half of the shots. Then those grouped okay. Okay, guys, so that's all I have for the target. Now I want to jump into the actual data. Enough talking. It's going to be a long enough video anyways. See you guys there. Okay, guys, so I went ahead and broke out all of the data into two tables. So I couldn't figure out whether I wanted to exclude any data points or whether to include them all. So I kind of wanted to show a little bit of both and also compare them to see if it made any differences. So this table right here, this is based off of the 8 best shots of the group. So I shot 10 total shots. I just took the best 8. So I basically excluded the 2 worst shots. And this was the ranking from best MOA or lowest MOA to highest MOA. And I am pretty shocked by some of the results. So Winchester coming up in first place with the 8-shot group of 1.32 MOA. And last coming in was Norma. So we're going to go through all of these individually real quick. So, and then over here, I'll mention real quick, this was a 10-shot group too, but let's look at the 8-shot group. So like I said, Winchester coming in at 1.32, excluding the 2 worst. PMC coming in at 1.40, which I kind of expected them to do fairly well. Winchester, I didn't. I would have guessed Winchester to be somewhere in this range if I would have put my bets on. ZSR, kind of the same boat. I thought it would be decent brass, but I didn't think it would be, top 3. And then Hornady coming in at number 4, which really surprised me. Not so much that Hornady came in at such a good number, but more so that there's a lot of these other ones down here that I just assumed would perform better than Hornady. And then Wolf, bringing in the middle of the pack. Now, if you look at these, a lot of these are within, 0.09 MOA or 0.1 MOA, if you will. So these are all pretty close. I mean, this is super small variances between Hornady and Wolf, and then Starline's just slightly worse. So these are all kind of middle of the pack here. Bringing down the last 4. So the bottom 4, Lake City, both of their head stamps came in at bottom 4. 18 to 22 came into bottom 2. FC right here, which is Federals, they came in at 2.26, which I really was surprised at. But I don't want to jump over here too quick. But if you'll notice, Federal is up here in the top 2 if you take the entire 10-shot group. Top 2. So it went from bottom of the pack if you take the 8 best to top of the pack if you take the 10 best. So there wasn't a huge difference between the 8 and the 10-shot group, which basically means the group was about the same. There was no outliers. This is pretty much exactly what FC or Federal is going to have, whether you exclude any outliers or not. So last but not least, we kind of mentioned this already, Lake City and then Norma bringing up the rear. So I want to transfer over to this 10-shot and compare real quick. So our bottom 2 did not change. They had the worst shot groups, whether you include all 10 or just include their best 8. They were the worst. Starline bringing up the rear, kind of staying pretty consistent. This was one of our first big jumps if we're starting at the bottom, working our way up. ZSR was number 3, but if you go and take their 10-shot group, they are bottom 4, and I'll show you a picture of their target. So ZSR had 2 major outliers, and that's why there's such a big difference here. Lake City, pretty much in the same boat. Hornady, kind of the same deal. They're within 1 place of each other. Wolf, within, 3 places of each other, so a little bit bigger jump. PMC, kind of the same thing. So with the exception of Federal, these places were pretty close. Almost all of them were within, 2 places. PMC, for example, 2 places. So that didn't really surprise me, and it kind of makes me feel better about not necessarily picking one or the other to decide, because they're pretty even, with the exception of, like I said, Federal. So that's pretty much the breakout of this, and like I said, I'm pretty surprised by the results. Not necessarily, I think it's pretty fair to say that Headstamp does matter. I mean, we're looking at 1.32 all the way to 2.83. That's over 2.5 MOA. I'm sorry, 1.5 MOA. 1.5 MOA by just changing your head stamp. And even if you go to the 10-shot group, that doesn't really change. You're actually at 1.7 MOA from the best to the worst group. 1.7. So 1.5, 1.7. I don't know. I'm not necessarily surprised by these results. I'm more surprised at the order of them. So, like I said earlier, I really, really thought Lake City was going to be in the top two at least. I kind of thought that second place would be between Starline and Norma, and they're down here at the bottom of the pack. And then, if we look at a 10-shot group, Federal's way up there, which surprised me. PMC, I thought would be middle of the pack, and they're number 2. And again, Winchester kind of surprised me. I know Winchester's a known brand, but it surprised me that they were number 1 on both 8 and 10-shot groups. They were number 1. Well, hopefully this data lets you guys kind of make a decision and also give you some background of next time someone mentions, does Headstamp matter? You have some information to kind of base that off of. You have the data right here that says, yes, it does matter. I think that we can all agree that 1.5 MOA spread and 1.7 MOA spread. I think if anyone found that difference in any reloading component, they would argue that it does in fact matter and it does make a difference. Like if you change bullets and it changed your MOA by 1.5 MOA, you're telling me that you wouldn't tell other people that it does matter, that your bullet does matter. And I kind of hope that this answers some of your questions and also keeps you guys from going out and having to spend, $50 in components just to see, does Headstamp matter? So I'm going to take you guys over the bench real quick. I've rambled on long enough about this. Okay, guys, so hopefully I answered some questions. Hopefully I didn't cause more confusion than before. I apologize that you guys had to sit through that terrible B-roll. It's my first video, so just kind of working out some of the kinks. Hopefully I didn't bore you to death, and hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you took away some information from this. Hopefully if you were kind of on the edge or you didn't know what to believe because there's so much information out there, but not very much of it is backed by actual data. Most of it is just some guy on the internet, just like me, talking about his opinions. But hopefully some numbers answered some of those questions. Not necessarily me, but hopefully seeing some of that data helped. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, come back. See ya.